I've met so many people who thought they didn't fit, and then they found that their skills fit. And actually, it's primarily why I started Cloud Security Office Hours, was to find those people and bring them in.
I'm not sure that this belongs directly on this list, but it's one of the things I worry about here. And that's that the cost of failure seems to have gone down dramatically.
And especially I love the external sharing, because that's where most kind of get tripped up on. Like, no, I do pretty good. Oh, wait, what?
My thing is, I'm an accountant who got into GRC 4 years ago and really enjoyed that transition. And I went from thinking that wasn't possible as a person with a business profile to that myth being busted to breaking in. Thanks, Neil. So Neil, there's your question right there. Requested topic, craziest audit failures. So I'll frame it up a little bit. So, hey, everyone, thanks for checking out, what I'd lined up for the presentation today, whether you intended to or not. You're just back for another Cloud Security Office Hours, which is an excellent group. I was here last week, and it was very much a CISO fireside chat roundtable with some really big ideas, and I learned a ton. And I thought, man, I'm not going to give a how to break into cyber talk to these folks, okay? But then, Sean did mention that people watching the recording or people that maybe aren't as vocal in the meeting would be interested in more junior topics. So my thing is, I'm an accountant who got into GRC 4 years ago and really enjoyed that transition. And I went from thinking that wasn't possible as a person with a business profile to that myth being busted to breaking in, being part of the GRC team, leading the team. And now I want to invite more people to do what I did, coming from a business background. And for those technical engineers in the room here and the breakers and the red teamers, like, I get it. If I had your skills and I'd spent 10,000 hours understanding systems so well I could break into them, I'd probably rather do that too, because that is super cool. But my 10,000 hours has been being a finance business partner, business administration, being an accountant. And there are some valuable skills in this team sport of cybersecurity that people with that background can bring to the table if they have a continuous learning mindset and if they're happy to get more technical. So that's what started my blog, CPA to Cybersecurity. And I ranted about why GRC is awesome and underrated on Reddit. And Sean saw that and invited me on, and I was here in October last year. And since then, I've kind of expanded a little bit, and I'd queued up a bit of an agenda today. And I'm hoping to have some value here for a diverse set of people. So if you're a technical guru, maybe I could bring some accounting or business perspective to speak the language of business. If you're brand new and want to break in, and you're intimidated by, the deep technical folks, maybe my vantage point would be a little bit more approachable. So what I'd lined up today was the following. All right. So Neil asked for the craziest audit failures, to which my initial response is like, you're not asking about the business failures that auditing would have helped. You're asking about maybe, and then when I search for those, I see the names of all of the big four accounting firms, and I've worked with all the big four and the tier twos, and they're great people, and I don't want to. I have a hard time picking on any given company, but I did bring the classic Enron example today with maybe some interesting perspective on why assurance work is important and growing, and maybe what the cyber Pearl Harbor equivalent might be of the seventh biggest corporation in America collapsing as a house of cards of fraud, perspective. So outside of like talking about GRC and how it can help, and maybe if you've seen it not done well, know that it could be done better and what that would mean for you to be able to reliably achieve objectives and advance your business mission, et cetera. I've also got a piece here on learning the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So was it Richard in the UK? I think it is. Yeah. Like I was just talking to what was you, right, Richard?
Yep.
So I was talking to Cybersal or Cybersala, who is a YouTuber out of the UK yesterday. He said, "Oh, that's an North American thing. I'm not interested in that." And I said, I get that, but how about I just give you an elevator pitch of it? And a lot of us are working at multinational corporations, and just kind of understand what it can offer. And I'd be interested in getting some UK perspective on that. So I think as I go through this material, I'd be interested in if you didn't know some of this stuff, hopefully it helps you, but also I'd be super wide open to your feedback to help round out my own understanding as I try to kind of advance this mission of helping people break into GRC and elevate GRC and get more into cyber. All right. So that the agenda covers why GRC is awesome and underrated, craziest audit failure story, a little bit on cybersecurity compliance origins, and then NIST CSF. That's what I'm going to go through. Do I have any questions at this point before I start to go through it? All right. So I already gave you my little pitch here saying why I like GRC from my vantage point, and then some of the specific reasons. So GRC didn't make the cut for the SANS poster for the coolest cybersecurity jobs. It wasn't a top 10 list. It was a top 20 list. And they did put on security awareness specialist or something like that. But I think there is a spot for GRC on there. Here's why. All right. So number one, we're revenue enabling, right? We exist to protect and enable the business. Customers need assurance, and we can help in that space. Breadth. Even if, so for me, coming in from a IT audit, financial compliance background, I was heavy on change management controls and access management controls. But I had no networking, no software development, right? No, blue team type skills. However, I worked to learn, and I try to aspire to get maybe a 20%-ish depth of knowledge in those broad domains. And I'm on a diverse team where we all have complementary skill sets. And something really cool about that is that I got to work in cybersecurity, period, which is pretty exciting, but also that breadth of exposure to all of the control owners right across the business is a really fun thing about GRC. So one, it's a way to break in from diverse backgrounds. Two, if you are highly technical, you're probably very focused on your swim lane. And so a rotation in and out of GRC would help you broaden and grow and, on the path to CISO or whatever it is that your career objective is. Exposure to top management is an opportunity. Immersion, not just learning about different careers and skills. Identity and access management is a career. Software development is a career. Networking is a career. You get to do some of that work and be exposed to it broadly, which is pretty great way to learn and advance your knowledge base and the value you can add. Business is booming. I don't see the, this is a little bit of a nuanced topic in the wake of, the economy and tech layoffs, et cetera. But just generally as one element in that equation, I don't see the need for trust and assurance in cybersecurity going down. We rely on technology more, and there's more attack surface and more exposure. And assurance, as flawed as a number of approaches to it are, I do see it as something that's needed to help avoid disasters of the scale of Enron. So that's my list. Does anybody on the phone here have anything to add or any feedback on the ones that I shared?
I've met so many people who thought they didn't fit, and then they found that their skills fit. And actually, it's primarily why I started Cloud Security Office Hours, was to find those people and bring them in.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think I was specifically told early in my career, hey, can we have lunch, information security guy, and you can help me understand how I can break into information security? And they basically said, well, dude, you don't have a computer science degree or technical diploma. It's not really going to work out. And so I said, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. And then I became an accountant. Okay. And that's a long trade and a long journey. And then it was more than a decade later that, thanks to things like this group you have here and to YouTube and podcasts and just, more people in the industry talking about it, advancing that you advanced, Sean. So, thank you for that. And I do think I want to be a part of amplifying that message. All right. And then so,
sorry, Jay had his hand up
Yes,
there.
Steve, just like a thought occurred to me, because I've been saying for a long time that it's good for everybody in cybersecurity to do a stint in SecOps, because you actually learn what really happens instead of what people say happens. Would you say that's a similar thing in GRC, because you see kind of the true state of things, even if you're not doing it yourself, but you're like finding these in audits. So maybe have a similar sort of, I wouldn't say cynical, but at least more realistic understanding of the problems that we face in cybersecurity.
But wait, wouldn't that? But you're still odds still rely on people telling the truth and not like trying to hide stuff. So wouldn't that effect be lessened? I mean, Enron happened, and and base and there's
Good
lots of
thing about
literal
audits,
examples that
Kyle,
Enron.
is that you actually have to submit evidence. So like just lying doesn't really work.
That's right. And I think that I'm sure that a lot okay, so I've been talking about Sarbanes-Oxley for like 10 years, and I appreciate in the real world that I might be the only pro SOX person. Like I think a lot of people have had a lot of challenge and friction and maybe inefficient audits that they didn't consider value adding, in the Sarbanes-Oxley space. But I think something that's helpful in SOX that well, first of all, sorry, I do think SOX added a net benefit in total, but I think that's a kind of a lecture in itself. But along these lines is that when you're doing assurance work, when you're verifying someone's attestation of compliance, right? There are different test procedures that you can use that accounting uses to get internal control over financial reporting that you can bring to a cybersecurity audit. You're not going to spend maybe the same millions of dollars that is common on a financial audit, right? But maybe it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But I think that go beyond inquiry. So don't just ask them how they do a control. You do some inspection, you kick the tires, you do some observation, you do reperformance, right? You verify the evidence. You don't just check at a point in time during the year. Maybe you get a population from 12 months and randomly inspect some samples. So that's the value that you can bring in providing trust and assurance for cyber risk or other risks. And that's what we try to do. So good point. People can lie. That would mean that your audit used the test procedure of inquiry. And I wouldn't think that, depending on the risk we're up against and depending on a number of factors, perhaps inquiry isn't sufficient and you would need to do more. But you're bringing that up, acknowledges the importance of assurance work to have accountability and transparency and compliance. All right. Any other questions before I move on? Cool. It's all very nuanced and very depending on the circumstance and the vantage point. The same GRC job, just like the same Security Operations Center job, is very different depending on the industry, company, and culture. But I do think there's some great stuff that you can find in GRC. And for me, I sure like it a lot. All right. Craziest audit failure stories. So I'm going to talk about the classic one, Enron. So if you haven't heard of it, what happened? So it was America's 7th biggest company. Today, it would want to be these logos here. And it basically evaporated and 21,000 people lost their jobs with no severance or health insurance. Their auditor, it used to be the Big Five, now it's the Big Four, was charged with obstruction of justice and loss of jobs for 28,000 employees, and 21 people were convicted. So it was a really big problem. And look at these. Accountants are usually so conservative. Well, they are, and risk averse and very careful with their words. Like, look at the words of this accountant who's the head of the regulator board talking about this situation. Unfortunately, in the 90s and 2000s, auditors lost sight of their responsibility to the public, which led us to take action. And they had accounting gimmickry, cooked books, phony earnings, okay, undisclosed transactions, and inflated revenue. So anyways, like, this is a kind of a public document on the responsibility of CPAs and the failure that happened at this time and why they needed compliance work in the form of Sarbanes-Oxley compliance to restore liquidity in capital markets, which, by the way, we did get so that the world can continue to go around. I think that the punchline of the story is that there was a giant amount of work needed, and some professionals did a really great job, but then a bunch entered the space that didn't do a great job, and then people like you, the control owners, we're maybe jaded by those experience. However, that's a whole separate story. This is talking a little bit about how this trickled out a little bit more into cyber risk as it elevated as a boardroom issue over the past 20 years. So you might have heard of SOC 1 reports, and those are about your SaaS systems in the internal control of financial reporting, like Salesforce or NetSuite or those similar things have a SOC 1, which are needed for financial integrity compliance. And then the SOC 2s are not in a regulated space, and it depends on kind of the scope of that report, but it's just another form of compliance work that's done to try to bring trust and assurance. And then I want to talk a little bit about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So is that okay if I jump to that, or any questions before I do?
The question I had was, what about like FedRAMP? Like I've
Yes,
heard FedRAMP's huge in the government cloud space,
it
and
is.
you can make a lot of money doing FedRAMP.
Sure.
So basically, have you ever had to deal with FedRAMP?
Yeah, it's a great question. FedRAMP is very narrowly scoped to the biggest corporation in the world, or like to the US government with its 3 million employees, right? So FedRAMP is only for federal cloud infrastructure, period. So, if you are working at a bank, you would not have FedRAMP, right? But if you are working for a federal organization, you would need FedRAMP for to use a cloud service. So the customer of the cloud product would have to be the US federal government for FedRAMP to apply, but they're a very large entity where there's a lot of opportunities for GRC work. And then similarly, like HIPAA is for hospitals or organizations with patient data. GLB is for banks. PCI DSS is for people that have credit cards flowing through their system. So there's a whole alphabet soup that depends on what is the information system that you need assurance on. And that actually leads to the NIST CSF discussion, because that was something that started for critical infrastructure, which is outside the federal government, but then expanded into commercial industry in a variety of ways. So I could tell you more about that. So great question. It depends on the scope and what the customers need to be able to trust. Any other questions? All right, well, I've got a little bit on CSF, and then I've got a GRC certification roadmap. And this is an excerpt from a course that I have recently produced. All right. So NIST Cybersecurity Framework, what is that if you've heard of it? So it started in February 2013. We had a presidential executive order that said America needs to improve critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And in this statement here from the White House, it talks about we do need safety and security to protect businesses and I guess critical infrastructure, right? But we also need economic prosperity. We need innovation, right? So don't find the right balance that we can have compliance without stifling innovation, and let's up our game in the context of protecting critical infrastructure in the private-public partnership to protect our economy and national security. All right. So there were growing threats to critical infrastructure that called for something. We wanted collaboration between government and the private sector, and we said, hey, make something. A year later, they made that thing. It was NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.0. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the primary authors of this document were not government employees who published it. They were people like you out in industry. All right. And that came out a year later in 2014. So this thing is 10 years old. We got a 1.1 update in April 2018, which was still focused on critical infrastructure. It added a couple of things. And then here's where it's saying this needs to go beyond infrastructure. So this person from NIST is saying cybersecurity is critical for national and economic security. This voluntary framework should be every company's first line of defense. Adopting this version is a must-do for all CEOs because cyber risk is elevating as a boardroom issue. And then recently, you might have heard about 2.0 in February. So what was that all about? They removed the word critical infrastructure from the title of the document. So it can work for Apple Farms and fintech and pharmaceutical startups. and big businesses, right? So it's kind of just broadening the scope of where it can be applied. By the way, it's only a 32-page PDF, and it's free on NIST.com or NIST.gov, and it's a very helpful document. So removing the critical infrastructure focus, it elevated governance to be one of the functions. I'll tell you more about that. Recategorize some things to try to make the language easier for bean counters like me and network administrators to be able to have dialogues about cyber risk management. It increased the focus on cybersecurity supply chain risk, which, by the way, they did in 1.1 as well, like always increasing the bar for that in our daisy chain of supply chain, risk and third-party risk. And I talked about improving language. All right. And then along that timeline, there were also a number of executive orders and regulations that in some way were influenced by the NIST CSF or mention it. And these are just examples. I think they're all American, but even globally, of the influence of this thing, CSF, on the world stage it's been acknowledged as a very helpful method for doing cybersecurity work, cyber resilience work, GRC work. And that has been reflected in its rapid adoption and by shaping and being included in executive orders and regulations. All right. So why do we need something like this? And which is basically like, why do we need cybersecurity in all businesses? Well, cyber risk continues to grow. I don't need to tell this audience that. And the cost of that continues to grow, which I also need to tell you. I like how Dr. Ron Ross, a distinguished fellow of NIST, bottom lines that. He says the greatest threat that faces any of us today is the threat of complexity, trillions of lines of code and billions of devices that are ubiquitously connected. What do you think about that? Like, do you think that's kind of how you summarize the bottom line, or any thoughts on like what's the elevator pitch that you give to say like why do we need cyber risk management?
I love this CSF, especially the 2.0. We actually had a little bit something to do with the govern aspect of it, which is the real big improvement as well, which was kind of there, but not really explicit before. But it's a really good, the way I talk about it, it's a way to help you assess how well you manage risk in the particular functions, categories, and subcategories. And I know that's literally pretty much the quote from it itself, because it is often misunderstood as like a attestation framework, or you could be NIST CSF certified or something like that, which is not really the case. But it's really good to figure out all the things that you could be doing, then decide whether you're actually going to do them, because they may not all apply to you. But it's really good to see, at least I help you ask the question, like, am I managing risk in this area at all? And especially I love the external sharing, because that's where most kind of get tripped up on, like, no, I do pretty good. Oh, wait, what? There's a whole thirds of category of things that you're supposed to do well, right? And I think it sets a really big bar, but you can choose the bar where you want to be at, which I think is also important. So like you choose what level of maturity you are at and what goals you set for yourself. So I think it's a really useful framework to understand like both where you are by asking yourself a bunch of questions, but also where do you want to be and what's the work involved in doing that, and therefore prioritize programs and so on.
Yeah, I think if you're new to the space, it's a good guidebook, being just 32 pages, to help you understand what cyber risk management is all about. And then also, if you're more mature, it is very helpful to tailor a NIST CSF type assessment to the unique mission of that organization and help make the roadmap as you've described. And I'm going to go further into those details. Before I hit NIST CSF and what it is and how it works, and elaborate on those points you mentioned, which, yeah, 100% are bang on. I'm setting the stage a little bit with like why cybersecurity is hard and why there's a need to fill the void with guidance like this. And any other so I was going to hit like the 10 reasons cybersecurity is hard, including it's complicated and everything's connected. Any other comments before I hit that? All right, so I'd be interested in the group's feedback on this top 10 list, and then we'll get more into CSF. Yes. Because you're the experts. So here's my understanding of why we need cyber risk, right? So we're all targets, like Sands told us. Makes sense. Okay. Because it's cybercrime. It's financially motivated. Technology is everywhere. McKinsey said that every company is a software company. Even an Apple farm has its logistics and supply chain touching the internet, which needs cyber risk management. It's inherently flawed. We're humans writing code, and Dr. Ron Ross has trillions of lines. And here's vulnerabilities in code that have been discovered over time, and the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog that's growing. It's rarely secure by default. Home routers. The NSA saying don't trust them, period, or like the ISP provided one. The secure by design, secure by default CISA initiative. Technology is complicated. 3,500 vendors. The Northrop Grumman layers of defense. The fan, right? It's a dynamic threat, not static. So unlike fire, which was a big problem, but it only needs three things, heat, oxygen, and fuel. We could put in regulations and controls and figure that out. Here, the goalpost is always changing in the arms race of innovation between attackers and defenders. And as a silent killer, when your car is stolen, you know immediately because you can't drive your car anymore. And maybe you see a smashed window. But if someone's in your network or in your email, there could be long dwell time and you wouldn't even know it until you have a big money payment coming online and the money never arrives and you find out because you had a silent killer in your network or in your application. The economics are driving more actors and capability. People throw that trillion word out there, but then, as an accountant, I'm not sure that really makes sense. And I've seen some dialogue on that, but we would appreciate it as growing in big dollars. And then, well, accounting is hundreds of years old. We're in the early innings of cybersecurity and cyber risk management. So the science isn't really settled yet. And there's a skills shortage, a bit of a debatable point there. So, 10 is what I missed. So, would you reprioritize any? Would you add any? What do you think about that list?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Have you heard of Daniel Messenger?
Daniel Miessler?
Yeah.
He's the best, man. He's cool.
Basically, some things I've heard from him are that cybersecurity is evolving in the direction of accounting, and that
Right.
it's becoming more procedure based and methodical, and the best business is treated as basically a subsect of accounting in the sense of planning for literally everything.
Less wizardry, less alchemy, more chemistry, more accounting. And he says, the flight, if you're a pilot, he uses accounting and he uses pilot of a plane, right? The pilot's procedure doesn't say, don't crash the plane. Okay, it has a procedure of the things to do, to get assurance for a safe flight. So yeah, no, that makes sense. And actually, I got that from him. And every time he says the word accounting, I kind of I chime in the unsupervised learning community to say, hey, like, there's wizards in accounting too. Anyways, that's a whole separate topic, but totally like there's an opportunity to mature, understanding the inputs and outputs that make you cyber resilient.
So I was gonna, you said, what do you miss? I'm not sure that this belongs directly on this list, but it's one of the things I worry about here. And that's that the cost of failure seems to have gone down dramatically. And so what I mean by that, when the Target breach happened, we were all like, oh man, this is the end for Target. This is gonna blow them out of the water. It turns out it really didn't have that much of an impact. And if we look at how companies have responded since then, it's a lot of, hey, here's your credit monitoring to add on to the 6 years of credit monitoring you've already gotten from the other 10 breaches you've been part of. Like it's very much, it's harder and harder to make the case for this from a pure business cost perspective. And
Neil, I have a counterpoint because
perfect.
I would agree with you when it comes to like losing customer data. You offer some credit protection and you say you're sorry, and then it's kind of over, right? But we have also seen cases of a cloud company in Norway just getting demolished because they didn't do stuff right, right? Ransomware
Yeah.
is really hurting things, and that's actually what's driving a lot of the new sort of resilience, sharpening of regulations, right? It is actually because it is hurting that like the SEC is starting to ask for like publication and materiality clauses, right? Like there is systemic risk. Even something like CrowdStrike, which falls a bit outside of that, but even there you could argue that like not having certain testing controls in place put the company at risk in a way that it's unpredictable if they will exist next year, right? So like I think it's getting a little bit bigger than it used to be beyond the I just lost your some retail customer data.
And Jay, you really like played into sort of the second half of my observation, and I shared this. I was talking to a couple of industry analysts recently, and I shared this, and the first thing they said was, "Oh, do you think that means that the demand for cybersecurity software will go down?" And internally, I'm going, "Oh God, please no." That's how I pay my bills. But my answer was no, because this is driving risk insurance. This is driving regulation and GRC, and this is where we're now. This is where the emphasis. This is what's driving forward a lot of the requirements and changes and push to deliver. So I think where I was getting to was I think GRC is an important, and regulation and compliance is an important piece of the puzzle of making sure that we're actually doing these things where the pure economics doesn't drive it.
But wasn't that always the case? I don't think that's particularly new, right? Like compliance has paid for security always, not out of the goodness of our hearts because we have to, right? And compliance is essentially a license to operate when you're a larger organization. So that makes you do certain things.
I'll agree. I'm looking at it from outside of the business, so to speak. Like I'm thinking of when I was an incident responder, there was definitely there was a time when just security budget and security was ascendant into around the target breach, where from the outside looking in, it was very much driven less by compliance, more by an association of risk and sort of some of the things that led up to some of the breaches that led up to target where there was more impact. So I'm gonna take you've probably got a better view of things than I do, and I'll stop now.
It also sounds like if you're in a regulated or very large organization, it's an easier statement to talk about compliance is mandatory. And then as you get smaller in scale and depending on your country and industry and the data that you have, it's much more nuanced. So a very broad, there's no one size fits all. It's a very broad set of needs. And it's hard to talk in generalities, but I guess we do abstract to that general level for the purposes of a broad career discussion. I'm going to talk all about how CSF is risk-based and not compliance-based, and that's a good thing about it because you don't want the tail wagging the dog. So I'll hit that as well, and also about how every business and organization of any size has different objectives to reliably achieve, and you'll tailor your cybersecurity strategy to that. Right. Maybe is it okay if I hit some of that? I do see one hand up though. MW.
How's it going, Steve? I was
Hey,
wondering,
good.
what are some effective methods for getting the board of directors more engaged in GRC processes? Is it just scare tactics?
Abstract the complexity of cybersecurity into 6 things, and those are called functions in CSF. And why don't I tell you all about them?
All right. Cool.
That's, and I think that was a little bit playful there, but I do think it's about connecting to business outcomes. And my last bit of this blog post is a scorecard, an executive scorecard that you could show to the board to advance your cybersecurity strategy. All right. So I'll keep going. I don't see any more hands. So let's talk a little bit about CSF, right? So we talked about why we need it, something like this, but what is it? And we actually got a preview from the discussion here. So first of all, it's voluntary. It is not a prescriptive framework, and it's flexible and adaptive. You tailor it to your specific sector. I'll show you examples of, I think it's a smart grid profile and a manufacturing profile, but then even outside critical infrastructure, highly tailorable. It focuses on risk instead of control. So there's that conversation I just mentioned we would have. Everyone's unique. So when this came up in this course I've got on CSF 2.0, I at that moment, so it's still fairly new. There was this conversation we've seen a million times, compliance and security. So this poster here on Reddit says, hey, what's this all about? It's such a hot topic. And this person nails it when he says, you should meet compliance because of the security work you're doing. You don't have it only. Right? And so let's talk a little bit about that specifically. So if you had a prescriptive framework about password complexity, and that's what you turned attention to because you needed to pass the audit, you're probably not doing optimal cyber risk management, and you'd probably be better served with a risk-based approach. And that's an advantage of CSF, right? So what do I mean exactly, right? So passwords, in this password strength testing tool, and if you ask most people, you'd say, hey, is this password secure? They'd say, yeah, that looks pretty good. And in fact, it would take thousands of years to crack it. Fine, but that's not how it works in the real world, okay? It's not a two-dimensional problem, right? What if you wrote that password down on a sticky note because you can't memorize it and you don't have a password manager? That's not secure. What if you have it in a notes app and your IT admin can see it or a third party can see it? That's not secure. What if a third party provider you made it with shows up at have it been pwned because of a breach? What if it's in the ROC U20 list, right? You don't get thousands of years of coverage anymore because that was in the password cracking tool. What about Mimikatz? It doesn't care if if your hash was made by a strong password or a weak one, right? So we need layered defenses. And what if that prescriptive framework didn't require MFA? You could argue that risk would be lower if you had a weaker password with MFA. So it's just a use case there of why you need to do a risk-based approach and not a prescriptive controls approach to do this work. Because with that nuance and appreciation and ability to keep up with technology, we would know that we can lower the risk in a similar way to password strength. We can get some risk reduction from MFA using known password lists and in other methods, right? Now, this is probably my favorite thing about the NIST CSF. It does talk about how to communicate with the board, and we touched on this a little bit. It facilitates communication and collaboration, not just internally and externally, not just left and right between accounting and information security and engineering, up and down as well. So I'll show you what I mean. I got this great picture here in the CSF, which is a public 32-page PDF, like I told you. So the executives say, here's our mission. We are a bank and we would have to pay a fine, and that's a compliance risk if we didn't meet that bank regulation. So that's high on the list. Maybe we're not regulated, but maybe we have customer data. So our reputation would be at stake if there was a customer data breach, right? Maybe we're a pharmaceutical startup and we need to protect our secret sauce intellectual property. We'll be big on confidentiality. So what is the mission and how do we advance that? So we succeed if we protect that intellectual property. Okay, how are we going to do that? Well, CFO, we need to govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Got it. Budget approved. Okay, well, shoot. Now I need to do cybersecurity. How am I going to hire those people, buy those tools, and create that capability? I guess I got to talk a layer down here to managers. So I'm going to go from 6 functions, govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, to 22 categories I'll show you. it breaks protect down into different categories. But then I need to go talk to the, Active Directory domain administrator. And they're going to need more than 22 categories to do identity. They're going to need 106 subcategories, right? 106 outcomes for cyber resilience, for cybersecurity. And so here's how it kind of rolls up and drills down to facilitate that communication, which is really cool. I found it helpful. I mentioned how it's a helpful guidebook as a beginner, but it's also helpful in a mature stages in your career to come back and think about how well-rounded is your approach. This is a view of what the 22 categories are under the function. So I talked about protect broke down. It breaks down into these things. And then those break down further. Here's an example of one. Another cool thing about CSF is it acknowledges that security incidents will happen. And so maybe cyber resilience is a better word than cybersecurity. So instead of asking the question, are we secure? Hey, I see ransomware in the news. It's not going to happen. Like, are we secure? It's like maybe a better question would be, are we resilient? Do we have backups? What controls do we have to reduce the risk? And if and when it does happen, are we going to detect it quickly? And then can we respond and recover? What's the plan? Because it's going to happen. So they still call it NIST Cybersecurity Framework, not Cyber Resilience Framework, but it's great to see the emphasis that a large portion of the 6 functions, when you tell executives what you do in cybersecurity, is focused on right of boom. After the protection, what do we do when things have an incident? The intended audience, so it started for critical infrastructure, as we talked about. And these are the sectors. And this is cool, so check it out. For the smart grid, they emphasize these subcategories in CSF against these unique missions related to smart grids. So what do smart grids need? They need safety. Okay, cool. Maintain reliability, resilience, and I guess smart grid modernization, probably about like technical debt and legacy infrastructure. But every organization has unique things to apply this framework to and to tailor their approach and strategy to. Manufacturing, human safety again, which is very different from if you are at a, selling consumer goods or whatever it is. Environmental safety. So if we're manufacturing eggs, putting them in cartons, probably not a big deal. But if we're manufacturing gasoline and a spill could cause an explosion, huge deal, right? So how do we buy down that risk appropriately with the appropriate tailored controls, quality production, and protect confidentiality of trade secrets? So it's showing you how it can be tailored to different sectors. It's applicable not just to critical infrastructure, but it's rapidly grown beyond. Not one size fits all. And this is my final bit here. And here's the scorecard, right? So if you kind of think about the mission you need to reliably achieve, you can choose from the menu of the 106 subcategories, and you could do 2 or 106 or anything in between. It's voluntary. Do whatever makes sense. You're the risk manager. And you talk about an honest baseline of your current state. So we're at a maturity level 1, and I want to do these 22 things. I think we should get to a maturity level 2. What would that look like? So that's your target state, and then how are you going to get there? And then you show your progress, right? So here's a scorecard that you could show to the C-suite or the board or whoever it is and talk their language. So like, hey, folks, as you know, cybersecurity is about these 6 things. It's about resilience, not just protection. Here's where we score ourselves currently. Here's where we'd like to be. Here's the gap. And here's how, we've advanced towards those targets. And from that, here's the top 5 things we need to do. And we need you to approve the budget to invest in those controls for risk mitigation. Or if you want to accept that risk, okay, sign here, press hard. Or should we transfer the risk, right? Or should we avoid the risk, right? That doesn't make sense. This is too risky. Let's adapt the business strategy to something. You didn't realize that what the GDPR fine was, or whatever it is, for that type of helping them be cyber risk aware. And that's CSF in a nutshell. And my last bit for today is to talk about where to start and progress over 5 years as a GRC professional. But I'll pause there. What did you think about the CSF? Are you going to, I find it helpful as the Rosetta Stone or the overall framework for ISO 27001, 17, 18, SOC 2, Cyber Essentials, like TSACs. The alphabet soups, they map nicely to those CSF categories, can be helpful for test once, assure many, and other benefits. But so sorry, that was another thing. Any questions or feedback on CSF? All right. So okay, if I hit the cert roadmap. All right. So it's a very common question. What cert should I get? I've asked it many times to many people, and now I get asked it. So I put together a roadmap to answer it. And I think I'll go through a few parts of the thought process to get where you want to go with your career and breaking into GRC. So first of all, there's a whole bunch of certs out there, and this is overwhelming. And so I probably wouldn't start with this, but I'm trying to make something a little bit simpler. Certs aren't going to get you the job, but they'll help you get through the application tracking system. And they're one helpful component of a career development plan, of which education is probably 10%. Relationships, like going to cloud security office hours, is 20%, and your experiences are 70%. And what you learn in the education can be applied to unlock relationships, can be applied to unlock experiences. All right. You need to start with the end in mind. So if you have a GRC analyst job in mind, or whatever the career is, what cert is on the job posting? So the ones leading the pack include things like Security Plus, CISP, CISA. I've done those. They're great. They're going to help you. Keep in mind that they're 22 to 46 years old, as we see here, and their costs have grown proportionally to the size of business they are. And perhaps that brings an opportunity for innovative startups to disrupt with lower cost, higher value offerings for certain niches. And also, they're more connected to what hiring managers need as a practitioner. So, I happen to have a course in Simply Cyber Academy, and I won't give you a sales pitch, but feel free to ask me about it after or check it out. All right. So let's show you the roadmap. So in year one, I want to break into GRC. All right. You need to know enough to be a part of the team. So how do you get that? Well, for myself, I started with books, podcasts, blogs, and YouTube. So here they are. There's a site called securitycreators.video with me and other YouTubers putting out free content. I list in a template I have some of my favorite books, podcasts, and blogs. That unsupervised learning newsletter with Daniel Miessler is certainly on there. Darknet Diaries we talked about last week. The cybersecurity canon. So I think I have links to all of these in the roadmap. I won't click them now because we're running out of time. There's 101 level courses leading up to something like Security Plus, the Google Cybersecurity Certificate. These guys are all great. And then I have a course here that's focused on NIST CSF in the Simply Cyber Academy. All right. And then in year one, intermediate one, years 2 and 3, you know enough to be on the team. And now how can you add more value? So being more of a practitioner, not just what's in the 32 pages of this CSF, but how do I actually do that, right? How do I perform a risk assessment? How do I make that scorecard I showed you? Those are practitioner type skills. What is a GRC department, and what are the 13 services in it? And how do you do them? It is another element. And then moving into year 2, you could get more into auditing like I did. And that's about how to provide assurance, how to do those test procedures, how to have independence, the 3 lines of defense. The CISA is a very dry textbook, okay? But it does have some helpful knowledge for you to bring to your job. And we do see it on the job postings, right? So that's a one that I made the cut for me in the roadmap. And then expert, I mean, probably to the CISOs on this call, like you're not going to say CISP is expert, right? But that earlier alphabet soup roadmap I showed you did have it in the expert category, and it's acknowledged for, keep in mind, we're talking about GRC here, right? So it's broad and shallow, and it covers a lot, and it has the 5 years of experience. So that's how I framed it up from a search perspective. That was my last thing to talk to you about today. Do you have any feedback on this as I continue to socialize it with people? And also, do you have any questions about what I showed you?
Hey, Steve, there was a question in chat. Is this all available online? Can you throw a link to
Yes,
it?
100%. So first of all, it's in my cpa-cybersecurity.com. And yes, I can put a link right now into the chat.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?
Would a CISCA certification be helpful for a pen tester?
Okay, great question. GRC and pen testing are like different ends of the spectrum. I do work with pen testers. I'm not one. I do know that OSCP is a very reputable one that the hiring managers seem to want. But as HR and hiring managers continue to copy and paste past job postings, and they don't necessarily update to say maybe the most desired and current certs. I know that certified ethical hacker is on more job postings, but isn't as highly regarded as something like OSCP or Pentest Plus. And then so that's all I know about pen testing, but probably I'd open up to this group for any thoughts on that particular one.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
So I just want to jump in there. So Sean had said he didn't think of CISA as a good use for a dedicated pen tester. I would sort of go the other way. I think understanding the business, like where a lot of times I've seen people in deep technical disciplines get stuck in sort of junior to mid-level roles and not be able to break out of them, is a lack of wider visibility and understanding. And the people who really knew the business, who knew sort of all of the other skills, were able to break out, maybe not year one, year two of their career, but when they're in year 5, year 6, that broader scope really becomes helpful in growing and building a brand and building a career path.
I would like to build on that thought. So I'm a dude that came to cyber from accounting, and some of the value I added was understanding of the business. And it was so I maybe then to get the business acumen, of course, CISA could help in certain ways, but do a CSF assessment and truly understand the mission you're protecting, and do some compliance work, and get out there talking to people in GRC broadly as a stretch assignment. Hey, can I rotate into GRC and do a CSF assessment or do a SOC 2 or whatever? And that will help you understand the business functions and outcomes of other departments that you can help secure. And this brings back the point that depending on your opportunity to get a rotation like that, maybe you could do that as an on-the-job thing and experiences thing without having to get a cert. But if you don't have that opportunity, then you would have to go to more of the education path to get that business knowledge.
And Neil, you're 100% right on that. So I just started a new job this last month, and both me and the other candidate both had the same technical knowledge. And the thing that set me apart was the fact that I wasn't just looking at this technically, I was looking at how my job interacted with the rest of the business and how the rest of the business, changed things. And also the fact that I was a chef. And he's like, you're coming into this with a different point of view, you know different things. And because of that, you're an asset to the team versus someone who's just technical. So understanding different things, understanding the whole business and not just your role, knowing where you fit in is huge. Because otherwise I wouldn't have got this role.
So that's a sales pitch for everybody to rotate into GRC. Ask for such assignments in GRC. You'll get amazing breadth, and you'll get that ability to advance. I think Freddie has a question.
Yeah, so I have a friend whose brother basically is done a commerce degree, and he's been asking, my friend basically asked me like, hey, he's in the US and he wanted to get into GRC or something, but he doesn't have any security knowledge. He has a commerce background. So he asked me like, hey, how do I get into GRC? How do I get my brother into GRC basically? And do you need BS, a bachelor's or a master's and certifications, or what exactly can you directly get your foot inside? Like that was a question he had.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start is that GRC certification roadmap that is linked in the link I shared. It's kind of a sublink in there. And it says basically start immersing yourself in YouTube and the books, podcasts, and blogs and start to understand what it's all about. And then, aspire towards something like Security Plus and kind of work your way through. Also, I'm a part of the Simply Cyber community, which is a very welcoming, approachable, and GRC focused area for newcomers from diverse backgrounds to get a foot in the door and start learning and immersing themselves and finding how to take the next step.
Okay, so you're saying at least having certifications will help you, other than having like a commerce degree, maybe.
Right, and I think the best way to answer that question, so both can work. A commerce degree can work. Not having a commerce degree, but having other things can work. But I think that person needs to find a job posting in the real world for an entry-level job that excites them, and then reverse engineer. How am I going to get the things or most of the things on that job posting for that specific GRC analyst role or whatever it is? And they should address their gaps in the ratio of 10% education, 20% relationships, and 70% experiences. So in addition to pursuing a cert or whatever it is, or an undergrad degree or whatever it is, they should start coming to cloud security office hours and relationships, and they should start doing a blog and posting their learning in public in the experiences side, right? So it depends, but I'd start with the roadmap. I'd start with the career development plan and target it at an actual job.
Thank you.
All right, it's 2 minutes past the hour. I could stay for another couple of minutes, but any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Please don't be shy. Connect with me, reach out, and I look forward to coming back to Cloud Security Office Hours and talking to any of you offline.